Welcome, everyone. We've just hit the hour, and as one of the programs we run in wanttobegreatmanager.com is managing priorities and use of time, let's get started. So thank you for joining us. We're delighted to be sharing some time with you and hoping that you are all safe and well. I'm Clinton Wingrove. I'm the author of Impact Virtually, and I passionately believe in the capability of managers to achieve productivity and make an impact without adding to the stress, etc., which is especially important in the times that we're now experiencing. I'm going to be sharing ideas with you on how you can make an impact without going anywhere, which is the situation most of us find ourselves in. This session is sponsored by Clinton HR, and I'm Clinton Wingrove from wanttobegreatmanager.com, happily sharing the material with you today. I don't need to explain to you that technology advances have shifted us tremendously. Normal technology that we use within businesses, but recently tools like this one, Webinar Jam, and many of the others. I also don't need to share much with you about globalization and social changes. This crisis, if anything, has simply reinforced and accelerated a change that was already happening. The world is now largely virtual, it's largely digital, and it's certainly very noisy. And that's why it's so important that we think personally about how we make an impact. And I'm going to be reinforcing that very soon in some of my later comments. And one of the things we need to realize is that we used to have long conversations. We used to use sentences. We wrote memos to each other. We stood face to face and we had conversations. But now most of our communication is built up of what we call connectives. It's brief, it's transient interactions between people, processes, and even things. We now speak to devices and they speak back to us. And I'm sure many of you are looking forward to getting back in your car and being able to speak to your GPS system or your audio system. But those things have had a dramatic impact on the way we achieve impact. So we need to be aware that where we used to have these relationships built out of conversations, we're now in a quite different world. Decisions also now are much more frequently made asynchronously, not synchronously. What do I mean there? We used to get together and reach decisions. We used to have teleconferences and you say, yes, but now we're having Zoom meetings, etc. Yes, we are. But what you need to do is step back and think about how your organization, how you personally are working. And with many of the tools that have become available concurrently with the crisis occurring, we're now seeing decisions made in different ways. People are using things like Microsoft Teams, Yammer, Google Docs, Dropbox. What's happening is we are equipping and enabling people to make contributions and interact with each other at completely different times of the day. And particularly for organizations, for example, I've got clients in the US, clients in India and China. Somebody may pose a question at what is 5 o'clock their time, and actually that's 3 o'clock in the morning, someone else's time, who gets up and sends an answer before they actually have their breakfast. These are all things we need to take into account when we're thinking about how we interact and deal with each other in this now, as I say, largely virtual, largely digital, and largely noisy world. And many people are talking about what's going to happen when we get back to normal. Let's be perfectly clear. This is probably closer to the new normal than what we experienced before. Even if we do come out of this in the relative short term, and I think those who are looking at the scientific evidence suspect that, in fact, we're probably not going to be out completely of lockdown for about 12 months. What we'll see is that the issue of asynchronous communication, the issue of using virtual tools will actually be part of that new norm. And therefore, we need to learn not just how to cope with it, we need to learn how to optimize it. Now, of course, many of us work in organizations where actually what's happening is people are working in companies that are equipping, they're actually engaging their staff. So they're actually working on how do we cope with the current crisis. Organizations are focusing on ensuring well-being and the mental health of their staff. And of course, those things are critically important. You've probably attended sessions telling you about breathing, making sure that you have a comfortable chair, get up every hour, etc., and move around. All those things are really important, but they're largely about surviving the crisis at the moment. Organizations will then slowly move to looking at planning for the lockdown exit. Now, of course, many organizations actually already had contingency plans in place. My own consultancy, we constantly preserved a 6-month running cash flow stream just in case crises occurred. But many organizations didn't. So they're going to have to work out how they're going to survive the lockdown exit. So that's where their attention is going to be. So the question is, what do we do as individuals? Of course, you need to focus on your personal well-being. And as I say, I'm not going to go into many details of that. You also need to focus on getting work done. I'm seeing lots of organizations now working remotely, but the levels of productivity are seriously suspect in many cases. And consequently, not only are they running out of cash because of lack of revenue, but they're running out of cash because of low productivity and spending money. But as individuals, it's also time for us to think about how are we individually making an impact in this environment. And to summarize it in the words of 2 or 3 quotes that I've seen going around Facebook and LinkedIn recently, if we invest in just our work, we might secure our current job. And of course, that's important. But if we invest in ourselves, we can create our own future. Things will change. There will be a new normal. We will come out of it. What I challenge you as individuals to do, as we encourage our members in wanttobegreatmanager.com, is think about investing time yourself now. How are you going to come out of this positively? Because there are huge opportunities as well as huge issues. So one part of that is looking at your own development. We're going to be focusing specifically here today on how you develop your skills at making an impact. But think more broadly as well. And we are running a whole series of other workshops. And I'll remind you at the end, we've got one coming up in May, which is around how do you hold other people accountable whilst we're in this largely work from home environment. So think about how you're going to be developing your skills. Because these are the 5 mistakes that I'm seeing lots of individuals, particularly managers, making. Firstly, neglecting our virtual brand. And I've had a lot of people say to me, oh, I don't have a virtual brand. Well, if you don't have a virtual brand, that is exactly it. You're transparent, you're invisible. Every one of us now has a virtual brand. And I'm going to be talking to you a moment in that. Secondly, we've got to make sure we understand how organizations work. Organizations respond, ironically, much faster often than the people themselves do. So you need to understand, if you're trying to make an impact, if you want to be someone who stands out, if you want to manage your future career, you need to understand how organizations are working. How does the politics work? Who are the influences in your business? Where are they now? Because before this, you probably bumped into them at meetings. You saw them in the corridor. You bumped into them when you went to lunch at your local eatery or the staff canteen, wherever you work. Thirdly, We need to be careful that we don't assume shared understanding. Communications is a very difficult thing, and sometimes is oversimplified. And I often use the example of the sentence, I never said she stole the money. I never said she stole the money. If you say that, typically you put emphasis on the words that communicate what you want people to understand. I might say, I never said she stole the money, because I suggest that perhaps Chris did. Or I might say, I never said she stole the money. I mean, I just thought she borrowed it. If you communicate in a virtual world, and a lot will be done through chat, it will be done through emails, it will be done through posts in Yammer and Microsoft Teams and collaboration tools, we have to be incredibly careful now that we achieve an understanding of the messages we send, which is much harder than if it's done face to face. And people say, oh, yes, but we use Zoom, we've got video. Yes, you have, but your video screen is often about as big as the one you have of me now. We lose the subtleties of the facial expressions, which is part of communication. We lose some of the timbre of the voice. The other mistake we often make is letting technology take the lead. We seem to now believe that video meetings with 20 people is actually the norm. We've got to be really careful here. It's exciting, it's interesting, and we love doing it. It's really nice when we're at home to have that connectivity. But it's clearly a relatively unproductive method of achieving many things. So the question is, what output are we getting for the input we're making? We also need to be careful that we don't let technology drive us, in the sense that somebody comes up with a tool that they like and then we all blindly follow it. Some tools are not great for certain things. So Zoom is a fabulous tool for some things. Webinar Jam is a fabulous tool for some things. Microsoft Teams is. But let's be careful that we don't use hammers to put in screws, to use an old metaphor. And then lastly, are we capitalizing on our current skills? And are we capitalizing on the opportunities that are presented to us? So rhetorical question for you. Are you thinking about your virtual brand? Are you thinking about how your organization now makes decisions? How do you influence things beyond your immediate role? Are you making assumptions when you're sending out communications? What are you doing? What are you doing new and extra to check that when you send messages, they're clearly understood? Are you falling into the trap of using a tool to do things it wasn't best designed to do? And are you capitalizing on the skills that you've got? For many people, this is not a challenge. This plays to their strengths. I'm finding a lot of introverts are finding that they're far happier in a virtual meeting than they were in face-to-face meetings. So it's playing to their introvert skills. And likewise, are you spotting opportunities? And we need to be careful. There's lots of myths. I've touched on some of them. I'll just go through these pretty quickly. And if any of you are interested, we're going to give you our email address at the end so that you can email us with questions. You can also use the chat as we go along, and we'll be keeping an eye on that. Myth number one, size matters. We don't necessarily get value out of having lots and lots of big meetings. Yes, if you're trying to bring people together, you're trying to establish team spirit and so on, then actually it is good to have a meeting where you might have 30 or 40 people on. Likewise, I find a lot of people now are becoming very conscious of the number of LinkedIn contacts that they have, Facebook friends, etc. It's not the size that matters, it's the quality. Social media is king is a myth. Social media can work to advantage, but I'm sure many of you have seen that it's very easy to provoke the trolls. It's very easy to trigger things. And there's a lot of research now into the fact that when we're actually on social media and video conferences, the 10 or so parts of the brain that are associated with empathy appear not to work the way they normally do. It's very easy for negative things to be said that would never be said face to face. And as I say, there's not a magic digital tool that will do everything. Think about the tools that you're using, make sure you're picking them well. Should you be active on social media every day? And I include in that webinars, teleconferences, etc. Again, be selective, be very careful. This is quite draining. And I'm sure many of you have suddenly realized that when you thought that not actually having to physically go to work and run around the building and get up and down, you thought this is going to be cool. What you'll discover is if you spend 4 or 5 hours on web-based applications, that can be incredibly tiring. Make yourself stand out. I see lots of people using virtual backgrounds, putting the fact that they're in the Caribbean up on the screen. Be very, very careful. If you're going to make yourself stand out, make sure you stand out positively. I saw a very senior manager recently where their little picture on their internal social media site was them doing handstands in a pub car park. I'm not sure that's going to do a lot for their career. And then be very careful about keeping things simple. We've had a decade where keeping things simple, stupid has been the motto. And there's definitely benefits in simplicity. But let's remember, it's not simplicity that actually we're looking for. What we're looking for is ease of understanding or ease of doing. As Einstein said, we need to make things simple, but no simpler than they really are. So how are you going about making things easy for your team, not trivializing them? And then everything should be visual. Most of us have probably got staff where actually we want them doing things which doesn't need them to be on a video conference, on a teleconference, etc. And then lastly, popularity doesn't necessarily equal impact. I'm sure many of you know in your social circles that the people who are the most popular are not necessarily the people that you'd go to for advice. The people who are most popular are not necessarily the people that you would depend on. So let's put those myths to one side and let's look at the more positive side. And I want to go through 6 things. The first thing I want to go through is focusing and targeting your messages. We're now in a situation where if we're going to influence our future career, if we're going to influence the network of people we've got who we can depend on to work with us, support us, cover our backs in a crisis, lend us support when we need it, we need to be careful that we focus and target our messages to them appropriately. Secondly, we're going to look at managing your virtual brand. What does that mean and what do you need to do? Thirdly, we're going to talk about presence. A lot of people are currently on webinars, and I'm not in a position where I can see all of your webcams. By definition, they're turned off. But just before this session, I was on another session where webcams were activated, and I was keeping a watch. Throughout the session, less than 1/3 of the people on those webinars were actually paying attention. The other 2/3 were doing something different, checking their email, and in one case, actually sorting out their filing. So we talk about managing your presence. We talk about how you make specific impacts. Making impact is about persuading people. And as John Maxwell, who many of you perhaps follow on LinkedIn, said, if you can't influence people, you can't have followers. So how are you going about deciding where you need to influence people and how you do it? And then we'll talk a little bit about using technology, and I'll come back then to how you stand out. So let's talk about focusing your message. It's really important that you think about 2 dimensions. Yeah. Firstly, you can't influence powerfully and generally. If you need to exert influence in your organization, you need to increase your impact. You need to think about, well, what exactly is it? What specifically is it I need to impact? What messages specifically do I need to send? So if you're looking at trying to influence the way in which your organization comes out of the lockdown, think about what are the thoughts you've got? What are those messages that you need to send to people? and be very, very precise and clear. Think very clearly about them, because remember, our communications are connectives, brief, transient interactions across space, time, language, and cultures. So what specifically are the messages you want to send out, that you want to be known for, that you want people to hear? Really important, therefore, that you take that time thinking it through. What do I need to get across? And then the second thing is, who are the targets? Who are the people that I need to influence? Because if you don't, you're actually in a crapshoot, because you're only going to be interacting with people now who come onto the Zoom meetings, onto the Microsoft Teams meetings, onto the webinar, WebEx, etc. Meetings. You're only going to be influencing the people who invite you into their collaboration tool. So you need to be thinking about, who are the people I need to get messages to over and above the course of the normal day-to-day activity. And when I'm coaching people, one of the first, I do a lot of coaching with senior managers and executives. One of the very first questions I ask them is, who are the people who will make or inform key decisions about you over the next 1 to 3 years? So, rhetorical question for all of you on here now. Could you write down now the people that you need to influence over the next 1 to 3 years? Could you write down who you need to influence over the next week to 3 weeks? That's probably work related, but start to think broader. Think about investing in you. How do you need to get things across? So when we finish the session, if you take nothing else away, take away that question. Who are the people I need to get messages to? And what messages do I need to get to them? Absolutely critical. The next thing then, and it's very much linked to this, is about managing your brand. And as I said, you have a brand, whether you've deliberately tried to create it or not. You will have a brand which is typically described with using adjectives or adverbs. People will be describing you. And somebody the other day asked me, what do you mean by a brand? And I said, well, basically, your brand is a combination of two things. Firstly, what are you contributing? What's your output? What's your deliverables? So that's partly your brand. And you know, some people are well known for producing, great results, whether they're in sales, whether they're in IT, in finance, in HR, it doesn't matter. They're known for their outputs, but that's only part of your brand. The other part of your brand is, what do people say about you? And those of you who can remember being in a working environment face to face, you'll all have experienced those situations where you come out of the meeting and you go into the toilets or the washroom, and that's where you have the serious conversations. That's where you talk about things. I can't believe what Chris said. Can you? I mean, God, we've just agreed that. Oh, if Tom goes on and on and on, and if Sheila brings any more of her Excel spreadsheets, I'm going to, scream. Those sorts of conversations are still taking place, but they're taking place in people's heads. Your brand is not what you say about yourself. It's a combination of your outputs and what other people say about you. So what do you want your brand to be? If you're thinking about investing in your future, you're trying to create an impact in the organization, you're trying to influence how your company handles this crisis, you're trying to influence HR in terms of how your staff are being treated. Yeah. What's your brand? Are you known for being logical, thoughtful, considering options, analytical? Are you known for being enthusiastic and positive? Are you known as the person who can always think of the negatives? So what do you want to be known for? How are you going to build your credibility? What's going to give you the image that you actually want? So what is it you want people to be saying about you? The second thing you need to know if you're going to manage your brand is you need to know what it is now, because you may actually have to counter. you may actually have to undo things. So what is your brand at the moment? Are people coming to you for advice, or are they going to other people? Are people asking you for your input? If they are, what input are they asking you for? Are you known as someone who cares about people and they're asking about that? Or are you someone who's known to care about data or sales or finance? So what is it that implicitly you can see people are saying about you? So if 15 other people in the organization were to meet on a Zoom meeting without you there, or in a chat room, or in Microsoft Teams in a channel, what would they say about you? Because that is part of your brand. And then think about two things. How do you build your brand, and how do you protect it? And let's take build first. So build is around looking for opportunities where you can become visible and where you can send the messages that will build your credibility. So if you want to be known as someone who's good at problem solving, look for opportunities to join groups of people who are solving problems. Look for opportunities to take a problem and fix it for people. If you want to be known as someone who cares, put forward suggestions as to how you could help people during the crisis. Set up that you'll actually contact people to ask them how they're doing, because very often people who need help don't ask for it. Very often the people who ask for it are not the most needy. And then how are you going to protect your brand? And that's about finding out how you're perceived. If ever we needed to get more feedback, now is the time, particularly if we're managers managing people. We need to know how we are perceived, because that is going to be significantly enhancing our brand, and it's enhancing it in definition, not necessary positivity. So we need to go out and get feedback. We need to find out what's being said. We need to then find ways in which we can counter it. And we see examples of that every day in the media, where people on either side, each side of the political spectrum, are putting out statements, and within 24 hours, we see many of them being interpreted quite differently to the way they were intended. And what we're seeing them then is having to take protective action or counter action. Again, you need to be doing the same if you want to manage your brand, but be careful, make sure that you don't attract the trolls. So second big rhetorical question, what is your brand? And what do you need to do about it? And that about it might be protect it, build it, strengthen it, spread it, whatever. So let's move then to the third one, which is managing your presence. And this is about presence in a number of sense. Firstly, during this time, and as I say, I don't think we will return. In fact, I know we will not return to the same normal. We need to be careful that we are present where the appropriate decisions are being made. We must be constantly alert to how is the organization changing? How are the dynamics changing? How are communications moving up and down through the organization? You know, one of the huge benefits of this crisis is it's encouraging teams to have much stronger connections, relationships, and unity. So we're seeing people connecting through these virtual meetings. Ironically, what it's doing, though, is taking us back to the old silo mentality, because we're building these strong networks and relationships with our immediate contacts. But what we're not necessarily doing is being present in other positions. So think about your position. How in your organization, whatever that is, it might be government, it might be commercial, it might be charity, it might be social. How are the decisions now being made? Where are they taking place? And are you present? Are you there? And it may mean that you need to be proactive in getting yourself invited into the conversations, into the video conferences, but finding a way to make sure that your voice is heard. The second one is pay attention. I did some research approximately 18 months ago into face-to-face meetings, and I had some incredibly useful clients who agreed that I could attend senior strategic meetings and at any point in time bang the table and say, write down what was just said. It was an incredibly simple way of checking people's attention, their level of attention. What we found was at any instant in time with 6 or more people in the room, about 50% or less knew what was just said. And I'm sure many of you have been there when someone says, Clint, what do you think? And you go, oh, can you just repeat the question for me? Why? Because at the instant that happened, you just remembered that you ran over the cat on the way to work, or you've got to buy milk on the way home, or suddenly a great idea popped into your head. Well, what I then did was research into video conferences, and video conferences I defined very simply, and that is where webcams were on for everybody and everybody could see everybody. In other words, it was the closest you can get to face-to-face. In video conferences, so things like Zoom meetings, Microsoft Teams meetings, any of those, the probability is that any instant in time, approximately a third or less will know what was just said. If you are trying to make an impact, that's an issue. If people are trying to make an impact on you, it's an issue. So how much of the information that's available to you are you actually hearing? In a virtual environment, it's probably about a third of what it could be. You need to think about, how do you pay attention? So things like removing distractions. One of the techniques that I teach people where it's critically important, people doing things like counseling or people in the legal profession, I teach them what's called quiet repetition, which is where you deliberately try and repeat in your mind what other people are saying. It really keeps your attention, and I suggest that might be something some of you would want to give a try to. And then lastly, the third point, building on that, is make sure your targets pay attention to you. So if you are presenting to a group of people on a teleconference, on a video conference, in a Microsoft Teams meeting, Zoom meeting, etc., do not assume that because you are speaking, that you are on webcam, that anybody is listening to you. So use some simple techniques, things like make a noise, which drags people back. Make a big visual gesture, which changes the screen, which is a technique film and TV producers use frequently. Make sure that you don't have slide decks with exactly the same format if you're trying to make a big point. The one slide that's got your big message on, make it completely different. Use your voice. Pause. Silence is deafening. It pulls people back. And last technique you might want to use is using people's names. It's the one thing we've heard most since birth. So if somebody says, Clint, instantly my attention is pulled back. So again, if you are thinking of making an impact, if you want to make an impact in this now noisy digital virtual world, are you in the right places? Are you where the decisions are being made? And are the right people hearing what you want them to hear? Or the third that they're hearing, is it the stuff from other people? So again, big rhetorical question for you. Are you in the right places? And are the right people, when you're there, hearing your message? That takes us then to the fourth aspect that I said I'd cover under this section. And that is making very specific impact. So we need to be really careful that we go through that. And this requires a number of things. So first of all, I'm going to look at it from a general perspective. and one is about securing airtime. What you'll find now is some of the things that worked in a physical world don't tend to work as well in a virtual world. So in a physical world, we often secured airtime by getting on the agenda. We'd sit next to the person chairing the meeting or directly opposite them so that we could catch their attention. We would lean forward so that we sort of shut out the person to our right or our left to get time. We'd look directly at someone to get their attention. Many of those techniques don't work in a virtual world. So you need to think about, how do you secure airtime in what is now a noisy digital virtual world? So using people's names is one good way. The minute you say someone's name, they're likely to respond. And in most of the tools that we're now using, like Teams and Zoom and so on, it recognizes that, highlights you, and you've got people's attention. Get on the agenda, do your homework, prepare in advance. If you want to say something important at a meeting, get the message out to people in advance that you want to make a contribution. Make sure that you raise things early in meetings. Don't leave them until later. In most meetings, what happens is people rush to disconnect. And towards the end of a meeting, people's attention spans drop. We now find that most people's attention spans on a webinar is about 5 to 12 seconds if all they're doing is listening. And if they're doing something, it's between 3 and 4 minutes before they start wondering what they're going to do next. Send stuff to people. Don't rely exclusively on saying things in a meeting. There is still a place for email, Slack, and various other tools for communicating with people. And also make sure you're even invited to join the sessions that you want to be on. And sometimes it can be a real advantage if you're on briefly. So if you want to make a contribution in a meeting that you don't typically attend, don't ask to attend the whole meeting, because you'll slip into a passive participation. Instead, ask to have a slot at a specific time. Now, when you appear, immediately you've got the attention. You're someone new, you're someone different. Immediately people will be listening to you. And you can say, I've only got 10 minutes, so let's make good use of it. You can now deliver your message really powerfully. Second thing is, if you want to make an impact, try to connect what you want to say with current topics. And you'll notice that's what most people are doing at the moment. You can't have a conversation these days without COVID-19 appearing. Why? Because that's uppermost in our minds. I hate to say it, but it will start to drift. And that's why, for example, we're seeing issues in some counties now with social distancing. Why? Because it's slipping off the current agenda. People have heard enough of it. So make sure, if you want to make an impact, pick the peak of the topic. Don't delay, but equally don't fire too soon. Likewise, command the stage. Make sure that you have a powerful voice. Practice what you want to say. Don't become known as the person who waffles, the person who goes, yeah, well, because there's a couple of, I've got to, let me put it another way. Those sorts of things will kill your impact and people will remember you. So command the stage, powerful voice. Practice your opening remark when you want to deliver something. Practice your closing remark. Never finish a topic with Q&A if you're trying to deliver impact. Finish with, this is the message. And in particular, think very carefully about your visuals. It's very much, it's very nice to have the kids and the husband bringing, or wife or partner bringing you cups of coffee in the background. It's nice to have a background looking like you're in the Caribbean. But look the part. If you're trying to make an impact, look the part. Now, if you're trying to come across as the entertainer, fine, put your hat on and have music playing. But if you're trying to come across as a serious decision maker, someone who's going to help with the strategy of your business, look the part. Yet onesies with pom-poms probably won't do that. And then add value. People remember if they got something out of it. So if you're trying to make an impact, try and connect what you're doing to the people in the room. Try and give them a takeaway, something that they can go, yeah, I'll make a note of that. And it's often a good idea to often send people stuff in advance. One of the things we'll do today is every one of you who attends will actually be sending you a PDF copy of quick tips for making an impact virtually. So we're going to be sending that to you, which we believe will give you some value. And I've also already highlighted some rhetorical questions for you to ask. So try to err on the side of being confident but not arrogant, to being persuasive without being forceful, to acknowledge other people rather than being timid. So don't sit quietly. If you've not got anything to say, back up people who are there. And be persistent if you're trying to get a message across and it's not resonating. Persist, because that's a key point. And in particular, stay focused. It's very easy. Everybody's now becoming much more confident about use of social media and interactive tools. And what you find is people are more likely to interrupt you now in a Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. meeting than otherwise, and distract you, because there's a certain egalitarianism about it. Make sure if you're trying to make an impact and deliver a specific message, keep focused. Say to people, okay, thanks. I like that point you're making, Chris. Can we just take that offline, or can we car park that for the moment? Because I'd like to continue with the theme that we're already on. If people start bringing in things which are peripheral, say something like, so could you explain how that relates to what we're talking about at the moment? Because if it doesn't, let's pick that up later. So make sure you stay focused. And there's a technique called broken record. If there's a specific message you want to get across in a virtual environment, you have to repeat it a minimum of 2 times. So people hear it 3 times. If you make a statement once, it will not necessarily resonate. So thinking about yourself, another rhetorical question. Please write down any thoughts. Are you securing and capitalizing on opportunities that are there for you to make an impact? And again, that impact might be immediate work related. It might be looking to how the organization is going to handle things in the future. And it may even be about creating your own future or your career. So let's look at making specific impacts. Let's imagine that you have an idea and you want to get that idea adopted. So that would be a really specific impact. So you've got a proposal for what we should do next. You've got a proposal for which software to use. You've got a proposal for how we support people who can't work from home. Doesn't matter what it is, you've got a proposal. I'm suggesting here that there's a number of things that you need to think about. Firstly, who are the people that you need to impact? Because frequently it's a small number of people. Obviously, there's a person who might need to make the decision that goes as read. But think about, who do they seek counsel from? Because very few of us make significant decisions purely on our own. So if you're trying to influence person X, who does person X seek their input from? Who do they involve? Who influences them? So that's the first thing. Who are the people that are involved in this equation? Secondly, don't wait to run a meeting. Don't wait to have the conversation. It's far more effective if you want to impact people if you've got a relationship. And having a contact is not the same as having a relationship. So you may have 2,000 people on LinkedIn, but how many of those have you actually got a relationship with? So if you went into a conversation, you know they would back you, they'd support you, or you know how they might respond. So if you want to promote an idea in this current noisy digital virtual world, you need to connect with those people before the key conversation takes place. ask them their ideas, establish their position, suggest how you might approach it so that they're pre-warned, so that you get some feel as to the level of support that you will actually have. The third thing is then, before you actually open up the conversation, which might be through a collaboration tool, it might be through a virtual meeting, it might be through email, but before you actually open up the conversation, which is going to lead to a decision, make sure that the people that you want focusing on it are actually interested. And this is about creating some curiosity. So don't give them all of your solution or ideas in advance. Share with them that there might be some value to come. So for example, we're going to make an offer to you, which you can take up or not. We're going to make an offer to you later on how you could get some access to some free information. We've already shared. One of the things we're going to provide you with is a quick tips book. We've got some other things that will be available to you if you want them. So hopefully 2 or 3 of you might be thinking, oh, I wonder what that is. Create some curiosity. So when you go into a presentation in a virtual environment, don't deliver all the detail up front too quickly. Tease, keep some of it available, keep people thinking so that they listen. Because just because people can hear you doesn't mean to say they do or want to. And then thirdly, we've got to be convincing. We've got to deliver powerfully with some conviction. So think very carefully about how are you going to put things across. It's really important, and even more so in a virtual world where stuff, if you're not careful, just disappears into the ether. And perhaps even more important, if the things are being recorded, make sure that you do 3 things when you're trying to persuade people. Number 1, back up what you say. People are becoming very skeptical. So if you make a statement, you make a claim, back it up. Tell people where the evidence is, what's the data to support it, and be prepared to defend what you say. Number 2, emphasize the benefits. People want to know what's in it for me. So if you're trying to make an impact, trying to persuade people, put across the benefits. And there's always 2. There's the benefit to the work, the team, the organization, whatever, but there's also personal. Most of us make decisions emotionally. And you say, oh, no, we don't. I always make decisions logically. Yeah, no, let's be clear. The research is very, very clear on this now. Just because an answer is logically correct does not make it persuasive. We are prepared to consider answers that are logically correct, but we typically choose between them based on our emotions. So it's really important, if you want to make an impact, tap into the emotions, make sure that people know what the personal benefits they'll get from your proposals and suggestions are. And then commitment. If ever we're trying to make an impact, we should always be getting a commitment from people. So can they confirm that they understand what you've said? Are they willing to think about what you want them to think about? Are they willing to do what you want them to do? We have to ask for it. So it's really important. My grandmother used to say, those who ask don't get, those who don't ask don't want. That was a bit cruel. But one of the things I have learned in business is those people who ask get more than those people who don't. So again, how are you in a virtual world creating the opportunities for you to ask for what you want? The commitment to implement your idea, the commitment to push it forward, the commitment to introduce you to other people, the commitment to go away and think about how they might do things, the commitment from your staff to do what you've just asked them to do. You need to make sure that you ask for that specific commitment, get that commitment. It gives the emotional connection, which is likely to secure the action. And then lastly, how do you ensure you've achieved the impact you have? And as I said, Frequently, in a face-to-face environment, we know that people commit to things, and then 2 weeks later, in any other business, we discover that it didn't happen. It's likely to happen far more in a virtual environment than it is in a physical environment. It is absolutely crucial that we ensure that the impact we wanted to achieve has been achieved. So follow up with people. So if you're sending messages, trying to build a relationship with someone in another department because you see your career going there, don't just send out your messages. Do what's necessary to catch their attention. Find a way to follow up. And one of the good things that's coming out of this crisis is that people are becoming far, far more conscious of the importance of one-to-one interactions, but we're not yet seeing the volume that's probably appropriate. So think about how you are going about ensuring that any impact you want to make is happening. Are you following up? Are you checking? Are you touching base with people? I've mentioned multiple times there the issue of contemporary technology. Everybody's getting excited about technology, but be very, very careful. There are actually hundreds, and I'm being quite precise, there are hundreds of tools in the same arena as WebEx, Webinar Jam, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, Adobe Connect, Zoom, etc. There are even more tools out there for things like collaboration, messaging, and so on. Be really careful. Clearly, if you work in an organization that supplies your technology, you have little control, although there might be an opportunity for you to exert some impact. Just because somebody's made a decision to date doesn't mean they made the right decision. But on a personal level, be really careful. The way to damage your reputation, the way to reduce your impact is to use either the wrong tools or to use them badly. And again, one of the things I've seen is people saying, why don't we have a Zoom meeting? Why don't we have a GoToMeeting? Why don't we have whatever? And then clearly not knowing how to use the tools. It is a serious distraction, and people are far more likely to remember that it was a clunky meeting than what you actually shared with them. So my strong recommendation is, if your organization is supplying you with a tool, invest in skilled training in how best to use it or them. And you say, wow, you know, they haven't provided me. Well, go out onto YouTube. There's YouTubes out there on virtually every tool that you can imagine. Most of the tools come with inbuilt help and videos. I guarantee you it will pay back. Become the expert in the tools that your organization uses. That will enable, again, you to make an impact. You will be remembered as the person who knows how to do it. If you have the ability to choose, work out what it is you need tools to help you with, and then make sure you choose the right one, because most tools are designed and built with very specific purposes in mind. They then evolve to become more general because that's how their vendors achieve a higher revenue. But they still, at their heart, have that strength. So, for example, WebEx was originally used heavily by the technology industry for doing virtual sales presentations. It's brilliant for that. Microsoft Teams, the clue is in the name. It's designed as a tool for teams to collaborate and work together on a rolling process with shared documents. Zoom was designed to handle short video meetings, very similar to this. Webinar Jam is very similar in that sense, although Zoom has got breakout meetings. Adobe Connect was designed for highly interactive participative sessions, and therefore is much better, for example, for training programs. So if you want to make an impact, work out what's the best tool you need and you need to use, and make sure then you become really skilled in using them. And it's better to be an expert in one or two than to be stunningly mediocre in multiple. And then I was going to mention something which used to be referred to as lumpy. But how do you create an impact in ways other than this? And again, I'm finding lots of people are slipping into a trap. And the trap is we do everything now using Microsoft Teams, everything now using Zoom. If you want to make an impact, know when and how to break the mold. Yeah. Organize a teleconference if you want to do something and for it to stand out, if it's appropriate to what you're trying to do. There's still a place for sending materials, sending physical things. So think about, how are you going to stand out positively in different ways? Is it different ways of using the virtual tool? I saw a senior exec recently make a fabulous use of a small whiteboard, which he held up, and when he wanted to make a point, he wrote it on the whiteboard and held it up to the camera. And you'd say, well, why didn't he use a whiteboard? And the answer was he didn't use a whiteboard because he wanted people to remember him. And 2 weeks later, everybody remembered the fact that he had this little whiteboard and he wrote on the whiteboard. If you're going to make an impact, it's about, as I said earlier, you've got to get people's attention. You've got to create their interest. You've got to be persuasive, and you've got to be memorable. So think about, you're an individual. Don't think just about the use of the virtual tools. Think about, how are you going to break the mold? And how are you going to stand out virtually? So that takes us to a quick summary, and then I'm going to make a few other points. So think about, what are the messages you want to send out? How are you focusing them, and are you targeting them at the right people? What about your brand? What is your brand? What are people saying about you? What adjectives are they using? And if anyone who wants, this isn't a formal part of the process, if you want to email us, I will actually send you a list of adjectives you can use to see how people might be describing you in the background. So that's something you want to think about. Manage your presence. Make sure you are where you need to be to make your impact. Make sure when you're in a meeting, you're actually attentive and you're listening. And make sure when you're delivering any messages, you've got people's attention, you've got their interest, you've made them curious, you prepared them in advance, and you deliver persuasively. Making specific impacts. Remember, emphasize the benefits. Make sure that you personalize, and make sure you've got the attention of the right person. Think about technology. Are you making best use of it? Are you sufficiently skilled? And how are you standing out? And make sure that that's positive. So we're coming to the end. This is a taster of a much wider Impact Virtually program we run, face-to-face, virtual. There's the book. We run workbooks. We're going to email you, as I say, a copy of our tips to maximize your impact. This is one of a range of products and services from Want to Be Great Manager. You can go to wanttobegreatmanager.com on the website. If any of you are interested in chatting to us, and we absolutely hate aggressive salespeople, so that is a genuine, if you want to chat with us about your needs or the topic we've raised, you can book a 30-minute call with us through TimeTrade. I've put the link in the chat. It's also on the screen here, and we'll send that to you by email. We are also offering people a 3 months membership of wanttobegreatmanager.com, which is a membership scheme specifically for managers, equipping them to handle the new reality. It's a monthly membership scheme. We're offering it for $5 a month instead of its typical $30 a month. So anybody who's interested in that, email us. We've put the email address in the chat box, and it's shown on the website. Anybody who responds to us through any of those means, We're also offering a 50% discount for you or your company on any of our masterclasses booked by the end of June for delivery anytime in 2020. We realize that times are tight. So we're running up. We've got 30 seconds to the end. I've been seeing a chat. I believe I've answered all the questions that have been raised. Thank you so much for your attention. We've got another session on the 22nd of May. 22nd of May. That's holding others accountable. How do we as managers hold people accountable, being sensitive to the current situation, but still getting the work done? It was the number one thing that C-suite executives told us they need managers to improve on. How do we hold others accountable? 22nd of May, 2 p.m. Look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks for your time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone.